Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to be hosting the great Cass Sunstein for an event hosted by the Behavior Change for Good initiative. I have a bio to read, and if I tried to do this and wing it, I would miss some of the important things I need to say. So excuse me for reading, but Cass is worth listening for. So Cass Sunstein is currently the Robert Walmsley University Professor at Harvard, where he teaches at the law school. He's a decorated academic, international best-selling author, and former administrator of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. He's currently a senior counselor to the Secretary of Homeland Security on regulations, but he is speaking here only and solely in his academic capacity. I was required to add that. Cass has advised officials at the United Nations, the European Commission, the World Bank, and many nations on issues of law and public policy. And he's the author of hundreds of articles and dozens of books, including my favorite behavioral science book of all time, Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness, which despite its wonky title has sold millions of copies and spawned hundreds of new government units around the world applying its insights. I would also be remiss if I did not mention that he is a delightful person, an incredible squash player, and my friend and co-author, and possibly the most productive human I've ever met. And the three of us are going to chat for about 40 minutes, and then we'll do roughly half an hour of Q&A from the audience. And we're going to be posting a recording of this on our YouTube channel afterwards. So we're gonna get started. Cass, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited.
Can we give a warm welcome to Cass, just like that? Okay, Cass, let's begin with nudging. For those who don't know, can you define a nudge and talk about the origin story of you and, I'll call him Thaler, but you can refer to him, I'm just going to listen to how you refer to Thaler, how you came to co-author this blockbuster book, Nudge, in 2008.
Okay, first, the two of you are two of my heroes, so to have unbelievable scholars and public policy analysts in the House, it's a thrill for all of us, yes? And second, Penn is a world center, maybe the world center in behavioral science, because so much is going on, including in the medical domain. So that's inspiring and thrilling. Okay, here's the origin story of Nudge. Thaler and I were in a science lab, and there was a spider. There was a radioactive spider, and it had been adjacent to lectures by Kahneman and Tversky, and then the spider bit both of us. And we knew, like a lot of what Kahneman and Tversky, we woke up the morning and like we knew about prospect theory and heuristics and biases. And it was, weird because neither of us had studied that. And then I saw the spider bite.
And you knew.
Okay, so you want the real story?
I like that one.
It took me a little while to figure out that wasn't actually.
The real story is that I was playing squash with an economist from a university who was visiting at the University of Chicago. And after the squash game, he asked me what I was working on. And I said I was working on things about pre-commitment strategies in law and about preferences are endogenous, not stable, and sometimes they adapt to existing legal entitlements, and that we really had not taken on board in law and policy pre-commitment and the shifting nature of preferences. And he said, well, that sounds like a terrible article. He said, you certainly shouldn't publish that. That's horrible. But he said, there's a guy at Cornell who's actually published something that's not unrelated that's also horrible. And it's called Toward a Positive Theory of Consumer Choice, and it's a hopeless article, and the incompetent author, I'm not exaggerating, is named Thaler. Thaler. So that was T-H-A-Y-L-O-R, and I looked up Thaler, and there was no Thaler, but eventually I found the paper, and I thought it was fantastic. And that paper led me to Kahneman and Tversky, and then I wrote Thaler a note, kind of a fan letter saying, you're so amazing, what a great article you wrote. And I don't recall him responding to this letter like, Ms. Swift, boy, you were the best singer ever, and mean is even better, then we're never getting back together. Is she going to respond to that? So he didn't respond, but then he came to Chicago, and either he asked me for lunch or I asked him for lunch, and we became fast friends. And we wrote a paper together with Christine Joles, a terrific economist, in which we talked about paternalism. And that turned into something on libertarian paternalism a few years later. And we did 2 papers on libertarian paternalism, a very short law review article, which was about 50 pages, and a very long American Economic Review article, which was about 3 pages for their respective audiences. And people were interested in the libertarian paternalism idea. And then we thought, maybe there's a book. That's how it came about.
And how did it come to be named Nudge instead of the ever so slightly less catchy libertarian paternalism?
Okay, so we were going to call it either libertarian paternalism or libertarian paternalism is not an oxymoron. And we went round to publishers asking, would they please publish our book? And one of the publishers, Oxford University Press, which declined to make an offer for the book, said you should call this Nudge. And as soon as we heard that, we thought that's completely right. And even though they didn't want to publish the book, they're invited to my birthday party.
And before Katie asks her question, I did want to ask you, so I'm quite fond of single-syllable book titles, so I like Nudge as a title. And I want to hear from the horse's mouth. How do you define what a nudge is?
An intervention that preserves freedom of choice, but steers people in a direction that makes their lives go better.
Hence the libertarian, okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
So the steering is the paternalistic part, like a GPS device steers you, or a calorie label steers you, but the libertarian part is you get to say, I have my own route to
Right.
Los Angeles, or I want that fudge brownie, even though the calories are a lot.
So I get to teach a class that's largely about nudging and sort of the origins of it here. And I have my own greatest hits that I like to cover, but I was hoping you could tell us about some of your favorite things that have come since you authored the book and as a result of this work.
I have a current favorite, which is there's an executive order from President Biden on customer service and trust. And it's not creating partisan divisions. It does things like it says to the Department of Health and Human Services, if people are enrolled in a program, automatically enroll them in other programs if they are eligible for them. And of course, they don't have to take advantage of them or stay enrolled, but they're automatically in. It has a ton of things about choice architecture and the reduction of time taxes. And if you've benefited from TSA pre or global entry programs, those are related to this executive order. And it's not like most executive orders, it's just so full of details. And it was baked, of course, with many parts of the US government so that the directions the president gave would not be not feasible or run against some roadblock. That's kind of currently my favorite. It's like a list of fantastic things that are making people's lives better. For a long time, my favorite was very simple, which was there's a problem which is children in the United States who are poor are eligible for free lunch and breakfast. And how do you get them to benefit from their eligibility? And Congress enacted a law, behaviorally informed, called direct certification, where you're automatically enrolled. And there was one rule, I'm going to use 3 words that you're going to wish you hadn't heard. Interim final rule, that's very technical stuff. But that interim final rule put about 250,000 homeless and migrant and other children in this program. 250,000 kids are getting food. That's, there aren't words for that. And the whole package of automatic enrollment in free school meals is, at one year, was 15 million kids. And that's because of a change in the choice architecture.
I love that example. And I'm going to let Angela ask the next question after I just say, I think it's that story and that example that motivated Maya Shankar maybe to reach out to you. Of some of you might have heard her amazing podcast, A Slight Change of Plans. And she was, of course, the first director of a White House nudge unit, which then, do you know how many nudge units there are around the world at this point?
A lot. Not enough.
Over 200 though, right? I think it's there hundreds.
Yeah.
I think is accurate.
Yeah. So there's in Australia, in Germany, in Italy, they're all over. I mean, there's been a lot of excitement at the World Health Organization because they have basically a behavioral team, which is very focused on nudging, and they have a technical advisory committee, which I'm on, and they're doing fantastic work. The United Nations is all over nudging. It's kind of baked into Argentina. I was just in Argentina. They have a nudge unit which is superb, and it's basically something like a majority of countries have something like a nudge unit now.
I think we even have one in Philly that our own Phil Hopkins of the poli-sci department helped set up, and then Kit Delgado over there is running the nudge unit at Penn in the hospital system. So we're benefiting locally too.
Wow.
I understand how defaults are a nudge, right? Like famously a nudge, and making anything easier in terms of like signing up and so forth. My mind can't get like, how is TSA PreCheck a nudge? Which I love TSA PreCheck, but how is that a nudge?
Okay, people are nudged to enroll, and then it uses choice architecture to make things easier for people to get through. So people are nudged to enroll, and then simplification is a form of choice architecture that can be regarded as a nudge if you make it really easy for people. So, but whether the program itself is a nudge, that's a fair question.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Okay, let's talk about Nudge, the final edition. We're not going to ask about the title, but we do want to know, why you decided to create a new edition of the book, and I guess, what were the new findings or perspectives that you and Thaler were motivated to share?
Okay, my favorite is sludge. So administrative burdens in the form of forms you have to fill out, or waiting time you have to experience, or places you have to go, this is sludge. If people live far from a courthouse, the likelihood of eviction jumps compared to if they live close to a courthouse. That's a crazy finding. It's because if you live far from a courthouse and you're busy, there's sludge to navigate and people don't show up and then they get evicted. If they live near the courthouse, they think, I can go there, and then the judge says, let's work it out. So the sludge is taken off both as a research area and as a practical area, and we didn't see that in the book, so that's there. We had the organ donation problem inadequately thought through. So we were for prompted choice for organ donation, not automatic enrollment, but we hadn't figured it out adequately, and the chapter on that is much, much better.
Can you say a little bit more
I was
about?
going to say, what's the best way to do organ donation as a country policy, I guess, right there?
So the challenge with automatic enrollment in organ donation is that you're in, but then after you forgive the word die, the family will say, no, they didn't mean that. They were just automatically enrolled. And then there's a thing. And so whether the organ is used becomes challenged. And it looks like it's not clear that automatic enrollment increases organs, though it does increase participation in the program. So to do things to encourage people to sign up, that's the thing to do. And that turns out to save lives. And there are a bunch of things you can do to encourage people to sign up.
Like active choice, right, as opposed to? Active
choice rather than automatic enrollment.
Right.
We also, our environmental chapters a lot.
You want to say anything you want about climate change?
Okay, well, one thing I'll say about climate change is if people are automatically enrolled in green energy, usage increases very dramatically. So there are 3 places where we have data: Southern California, Germany, and most in Switzerland, where people are automatically enrolled. You're in solar unless you want to opt out. In some places, most of the data is best in Switzerland. It's more expensive. And yet people who have small companies, mid-sized companies, and big companies, just like households, tend to stick green. And if you look at the magnitude of greenhouse gas emission reduction in Switzerland, it's very, very high. And it's not a mandate. It's just automatic enrollment.
That's really interesting. All right, so we've been covering history a little bit because we talked about 2003, I guess, when you all wrote your libertarian paternalism articles, and the 2008 publication of Nudge, and the final edition is even history now. But fast forward to 2024, what are you most excited about in the world of nudging today? What do you sort of see on the horizon?
Okay, that's great. I've been shocked to see the research and practical focus on sludge reduction. So I was recently in a country in which there was discussion of administrative burdens, cognitive scarcity, and time taxes. And it was like electricity.
And wait, like, what are time taxes?
Okay, time taxes. To get a medical appointment, will be counterfactual, but to get a medical appointment at Penn, there are 5 things you have to do, and they're going to take you a while. This is counterfactual, but it's a time
Cover your
tax.
ears, Penn Medicine.
So this is
It's working on that. He's going to get rid of the 4 of the 5.
That kid has fixed it. To get a green card in the United States, the number of things you have to do is X and Y and A, B, and C, and the amount of time that you have to spend doing those things is a lot. To cancel a subscription to a magazine involves
It's impossible.
It's impossible. You actually can't cancel a subscription to a magazine. So these are time taxes, and for people who are struggling with, let's say, old age, little kids, illness, some sort of disability, sludge is like a curse or a wall. So there's a terrible issue of inequity, as well as issues involving economic growth and productivity. So the war on sludge is a really good war, and it has a phenomenal practical payoff. It can change people's lives massively, that they can get something that they need, like a right to stay in the country, a right to work. I'll mention something at DHS where, let's just have a placeholder, this is going to be accurate but a little cryptic. Automatic enrollment in worker authorization in some circumstances flips from 180 days to 540 days. Got it? You're automatically enrolled in worker authorization. You get to work 540 days, not 180 days. For employers in the United States and for vulnerable employees, that changes the world. The employers don't have to think, my gosh, I have to put these people where, in shelters after 180 days? No, they get to work. And for the vulnerable people who might have to go to shelters, they get to keep their jobs. And that's just a sludge reducing thing. So that I'm very excited about in terms of progress, and also we need to know much more empirically and conceptually about the effects of, let's say, dizziness, illness, old age, equity of multiple kinds. There's a great book by Mullainathan and Shafir called Scarcity. I think it's just a start. It is one of my very favorite books, but it's just a start on this. In terms of a frontier that isn't as self-evidently practical, it's something I've been very focused on for the last couple of years. It's a domain where we don't have enough behavioral science. It's the phenomenon of habituation. So if you go in a room where there's smoke, in the first 15 minutes, your nose is going to be very disturbed. After maybe an hour, there's a good chance your nose will barely notice it. If you are incentivized to lie, there's a real experiment on this, in the first moments of your lying, your amygdala is going to be on fire, that for most of us, lying is extremely awful to do, even if you're incentivized sufficiently that you'll do it. But at the end of the day, the amygdala completely quiets. So people will lie, and their amygdala won't be going off anymore. 43 hours into a vacation, the data suggests, is the best time of vacation. After 43 hours, it gets less amazing. The first 43 hours are, especially toward the end, when you're used to it, not disconcerted, you're on cloud 9. Afterwards, you're kind of used to the amazingness. This phenomenon of habituation suggests that counterintuitively, if you're enjoying a really good experience, like at a restaurant or something, break it up. Break up the good experiences. If you're having a not good experience, like having to clean up or do something that's really not fun, motor through. Because if you motor through, you'll habituate, it's going to be awful. If you take a break, then you're going to have to gear up again and you'll be dishabituated. And it'll be terrible. So to chop up the good and to motor through the bad is counterintuitive. People don't expect that, but that's what data suggests is right. Now, what's noteworthy about habituation, and thank you for your indulgence with me on this new frontier topic, is that it's an obstacle to well-being in two different ways. First is we have fantastic things that we're used to. So for me coming here to Penn, I sent a note immediately to my wife saying, Penn is amazing, it's fantastic. I was just looking around and kind of overwhelmed by parts are beautiful, some parts that are grand, it's just fantastic here. And my guess is for you all who are here, you didn't notice that this morning, at least not as I did. So things that are amazing in life, even friends and partners, they tend to become gray. And that's something we can work on. And also, if we're around something that's not good, like cruelty or awfulness or lying or misinformation or grimness, we get used to them, and they turn gray also, which is a blessing that we don't have to knock our head against the wall. But it's also a curse because we're not knocking our head against someone. And we probably should if we're surrounded by cruelty, et cetera. So in countries where there isn't much freedom, freedom is actually, or not, is a very modest contributor to well-being. Do you really care that much about freedom? And in places where income is low, they don't care much about income. They get used to poverty and lack of freedom. That's human, but not only good.
I'm going to set up this next question for the audience because not everybody has read about the IFrame versus the SFrame. However, if you have ever heard IFrame versus SFrame, raise your hand. Okay, smart audience. Okay, so for those of you who haven't, Cass, I know you know that two scientists who you both know well, George Lowenstein and Nick Chater, if I'm pronouncing that right, wrote this paper critiquing nudges. Critiquing the whole damn movement. And they say that the problem is that nudges are really directed at the individual. So it's an IFrame solution, right? Like, how do I get this person to save more for retirement, to stop procrastinating, to eat better, to sleep better? What we should be doing is taking a societal or situational frame, the SFrame. And it was a little bit of a tempest in a teapot, the teapot being other behavioral economists. And I wondered what you have to say.
Okay, so we have to specify the proposition. If the proposition is that to have individual-focused responses to climate change or unhealthy whatever is sufficient, and that it wouldn't be sufficient, we need things that aren't that, that's completely right. So if you're worried about climate change, are we allowed to be? That's okay to be worried about?
I think this is a safe space, Cass.
This is a safe space to
We
worry
can
about.
be worried about the
Worried about
goddamn planet melting into a tiny little puddle of nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we're worried about climate change, to have fuel economy labels and automatic enrollment in green energy, that's not enough. We want fuel economy rules I want, or energy efficiency rules, and the various subsidies that are bringing emissions down, we want them too. And if climate change isn't something you're focused on, take the problem, let's say, of violent crime. We could have, and probably should have, a behaviorally informed response to the problem of violent crime, thinking, are there nudges that can get people who are maybe going to be violent criminals less likely to be that, and to get people who are vulnerable to violent crime to engage in self-protective measures? Those would be very good things to do. But we also want, let's say, enforcement of the criminal law in a way that is deterrent, and also opportunities for people such that crime isn't attractive, and those might not be nudges. So if the proposition is that nudges aren't sufficient for what ails us, how does one respond to that? Is it like saying, yes, dropped objects fall? They do. Was that too coded or too subtle? To say that the Earth goes around the sun, that's correct.
So no disagreement.
Are you excited to hear that the Earth goes around the sun? Did you think, whoa, that was amazing, I'm glad I came? So, okay, so I think okay, so let's back up a little bit, shall we? We've talked about nudges. Many of the most impactful, behaviorally informed interventions are not nudges. So if you look at energy efficiency rules from the US government and from Europe, and if you look at an energy efficiency rule from kind of the day before yesterday, like very recently, it explains the justification for energy efficiency rules in behavioral terms. It refers to behavioral biases on the part of consumers, which may mean that they're insufficiently attentive to energy savings and the long term, call it present bias, and maybe inertia and status quo bias are playing a role also, and they don't get things that would be in their economic interest. And this is a mandate, energy efficiency mandate. The same is true of the fuel economy mandate. There's a great deal going that isn't in the domain of nudging and that's behavioral, and hooray for that. If the claim is that nudges are, and the paper, as you say, seems to be, what's the right word, concerned about the modest impact of nudges.
And a crowding out attention to these other.
So there are two claims. One claim, and I should say George Lowenstein in particular, it pains me. I'm trying to avoid being critical of him because I love him as a person and I admire him on a scale of 1 to 100, 100,000. He's like one of the best researchers in the world. He's fantastic. So if the claim is that nudges have a modest impact, if you get millions of school children having meals that they wouldn't otherwise have, that's a pretty big impact. And if you can do something that gets like 5,000 people making a material difference in their eating habits in a way that improves the health, let's say, of 10%, that's really good. That's a good day. So we need to go case by case to see which have a little impact, which have no impact, and which have a huge impact. Then there's ones that fall in all those categories. The crowding out idea is that this might be too exotic, but there's a claim that if you do nudges, you won't do the other things. And is it right to say that if we make assault a tort, we also won't make it a crime? Aren't there many nations in the world that because they make it a civil wrong to assault someone, they don't make it a criminal wrong to assault someone? No, they do both. So the fuel economy rules, the US government has some nudges to promote fuel-efficient car choices, like the label tells you something about greenhouse gases, it's a nudge. It's behaviorally informed. Probably not a perfect one, could do better. But that didn't discourage the fuel economy rule. So in the US government and all the governments I've worked with, I haven't found a single case where a choice-preserving intervention deterred selection of a choice-eliminating intervention, though there are plenty of cases where people like choice-preserving interventions but don't like choice-eliminating interventions. Like most nations want to nudge people not to smoke, but don't want to ban cigarettes. That's not because they want to nudge people not to smoke. It's because they're not in favor of banning cigarettes. If we didn't have the nudges, we wouldn't have the bans.
I think you're right. Go on.
We agree with you. I'm actually arguing with George about this on stage in a couple of months.
Me
so.
too.
Oh, really?
But
We
different
both
stage.
agreed?
Yeah, no, we're both going to be arguing in separate
and
events.
We'll send them to you too for your comments.
Yeah.
Okay, so from one controversy to the other, or to the next, we want to talk a little bit about the recent high-profile frauds in our, or I should say allegations of fraud in behavioral science, which I think have pained all of us extraordinarily. And those revelations have led a lot of people to distrust our field and to question its value for policy. So I wanted to ask you to reflect a little bit on how you think we as a field should respond to those kinds of concerns, and also to what degree learning that there have been, it seems, some high-profile cases of fraud has shaken your faith, or maybe it hasn't.
Okay, so this is challenging and more fun to answer than it should be. In the original Kahneman and Tversky paper, there were 3 heuristics identified. Availability, where you think things are more likely if they're cognitively available. So I think the chance that I beat my best squash partner with whom I'm even next time we play is like really high because I won the day before yesterday. That's not a good thought. It's available to me that I won the day before yesterday. We're even. It's 50-50. So people tend to think what's cognitively available. Doctors do, by the way. There's evidence they use the availability heuristic. Does it sound like I'm delaying an answer to the question? The availability heuristic is really fun. It suggests that people inflate probability likelihood if an event comes readily to mind. Is it clear where I'm going here on this? So the number of frauds from Professor Duckworth and Professor Milkman, 0. The likelihood of fraud from either, I'm prepared to say, is 0. The number of frauds from Kahneman and Tversky, 0. The number of frauds from Alex Imas at Chicago and Eric Johnson at Columbia and Elke Weber at Princeton is 0. The number of frauds we're going to spend here a long time. The number of frauds from Oren Bargill at Harvard is 0. The number of frauds from Matthew Rabin at Harvard is 0. The Matthew of frauds from Stefano Della Vigna at Stanford is 0. I could go on really for hours on the number of non-frauds. The number of, I don't study history, like a historian would. My guess is if we did, we would find frauds in history. And I wouldn't think that Eric Foner, who's the great Civil War historian, is with some inflated probability a fraud because I found a fraud who was somewhere. Okay, I know a lot of law professors. This is interesting. I can't think offhand of any fraud law professors, but I can think of some who've done some work that's shoddy. And does that make me think that law professors are shoddy? No, it makes me think those people are shoddy. So the 2 people accused of my own faith in behavioral economics and behavioral science is unimpaired by 2 cases of alleged fraud. They're very sad and extremely shocking. At least I don't mean to make a final judgment about them without looking at it, but looking kind of casually at the allegations, it strikes me as amazing and maybe the allegations aren't true, but I don't know. Do you play sports? Do you have friends who cheat? I was and kind of still am a tennis player, and we know people who cheat. Do we think tennis players cheat? Some tennis players cheat. So I find, I mean, to figure out, okay, so what's inspiring and thrilling is to figure out when behaviorally informed interventions have an effect. It's what both of you are doing, and what the magnitude of the effect is. And if we find that a nudge has no effect, that's a great finding. I mean, Katy and I have talked about nudges in the domain of vaccine hesitancy that have no effect. To find it has, that a ton of them have no effect, that's great to know. Don't do that. And that's all very interesting and extremely productive. And if there's a universe of things that have no effect, that's super important to know. That's an advance. And that makes the field better. If you have 2 people or 5 people who commit fraud, on what cognitive operation would you then impugn their colleagues and friends who are maybe, you know, in tears or enraged? Why would you be mad at them?
It does seem like it suggests, though, that maybe there are things we could do to, you know, tighten the ship. So this is harder, given that we don't know how often audits even happen, and a couple came to light recently. That, do you have any thoughts on anything that you would like to see done that might make it harder for this to happen?
Okay, so research fraud is extremely grave. Making up data, I smile because it seems to me unthinkable. So how would you get if that happened, how would you get yourself in a mindset where you make up data? That's hard, isn't it? I mean, I can see exaggerating your achievements in a social setting. Maybe you're trying to get a date. You say something that's a little, but making that, I don't even understand it. It seems pathological. And so what would work to overcome it, that's hard. I mean, things that are in the nature of pre-registration and publicizing data, those are all good ideas. But and I'm exercised about it, especially if I focus on it. I don't know how you all feel, but making up data is really bad, and a severe sanction is justified. Being fast and loose with data isn't as bad as making up data, but it's bad. Killing someone's worse, like a lot worse.
Definitely.
So I think whether, this may be my lawyer background, whether we need to ramp up protocols or whether, sure, but there's reason for concern, I think, that if you, I did read some things recently by social scientists who said that the sludge now introduced to do a study is so high, they're just going to do conceptual work now. They're not going to do any empirical work anymore. And so there's an optimal level of deterrence, and probably we're not there.
If there's anybody from the IRB in this room, please no more sludge. And we also love you so much. Cass, we probably shouldn't speak about the upcoming election, or maybe we should, but either way, Katy and I were curious about what you see on the near-term horizon for behaviorally informed public policy. You know, I guess you could take this question wherever you want, but just like looking ahead to the, you know, what is going to happen in the next few months or a year. Any thoughts top of mind?
There's a lot going on. So President Biden's had a junk fees initiative. You know about this? In fact, he's personally spoken about it a fair bit. And the head of the national...
Wait, I don't know about it, so you're going to tell us, right?
Okay. Suppose you are buying a ticket to go to a Taylor Swift concert, and who hasn't?
I don't know,
Don't-
but like, keep talking.
been, yes.
This is so great.
Okay, so let's suppose this wouldn't be true for, I'm a fan, so I can't believe it would be true. The ticket costs $70, and then as you come to pay the $70, they say, that, oh, there's a service fee of $18, and you've already committed to the 70, and then there's 18. Or suppose you're going on a vacation to somewhere in Florida, and the hotel costs $200 a night, and then there's a resort fee, which you see as you're checking out, which is $30 a night. Or suppose you are buying an airline ticket, and there's a tax added on, which is X, and you didn't know about it at the time you committed, or until you're right about to it. Okay, so there's a terrific paper by Natasha Sarin, who's an economist as well as a lawyer, in the Columbia Law Review, basically about the problem of consumer protection and hidden fees. And she urges that this is a market failure, it's a behavioral market failure, where because the relevant product characteristic isn't salient, companies don't compete over it, and it creates a welfare loss, and it creates serious inequity because the people who bear the cost are typically people who can't readily bear the cost. The head of the National Economic Council actually said publicly, the junk fees initiative from the president is a triumph for behavioral science, and it shows how academic research of decades ago can become public policy. And there it is, it's all over multiple agencies which are going after junk fees. We also have an initiative from the FTC about non-compete clauses, where the idea is that people are told they can't compete. And they sign those agreements after they leave. And there's been work by economists and behaviorally informed types saying that there's a behavioral market failure there too. People aren't knowing exactly what they're signing or what they're doing. They're not taking on board the full set of costs. And there's an effort to outlaw these. Very recently, our Consumer Bureau decided to outlaw high overdraft protection fees, where people are enrolled in automatic protection, payment protection programs where they overdraft and then they pay a very high interest rate. And the Consumer Bureau proposes to cap them quite low. And that is a product, clearly, of a host of behavioral findings. And it's, there's a good chance it's right. It's been proposed. And it's a real frontier in behavioral science. The FDA has proposed to ban menthol cigarettes. This is very controversial, but the cigarette consumption is a prime area for, as you know, behavioral economics, work on present bias, unrealistic optimism, as well as addiction. The menthol, the people who like it, think that this will save a very large number of lives, and that it will have, in terms of equity, big benefits because people of color are disproportionately targeted by the menthol sales. And so this is, much more is going on now in behavioral science, including in nudging, than was even 10 years ago. And it's because the stuff has seeped into the DNA of policymakers. So these are all things
You would consider that under the aegis of behaviorally informed policy, even though a ban on menthol cigarettes, I think some would argue falls outside of, you know, libertarian paternalism because
Completely.
like, right? So,
Completely.
So can you explain that a little bit?
You're right. So now this is a point for Lowenstein. So his argument is that that the focus has been on nudges and not on other kinds of interventions.
Like mandates and bans, right? Yeah.
But he's correct in saying that if we focused only on nudges, we wouldn't be focusing on enough things. But it's not true to say there hasn't been focus on other things. So there's a lot in the domain of taxes and subsidies and mandates and bans that are behaviorally informed. And we might not like them, but and they might not in the end be a good idea, but these are frontiers.
Right, legislation against addictive substances could be behaviorally informed even if it's not a nudge. Okay, thanks.
So this is a constellation of things. Whether they would be divisive between Republicans and Democrats, we may never know.
Do you want to go next?
He said with no emotion.
We're going to pivot a little bit away from talking about public policy, even though that was the advertised focus of this event. Before we turn to Q&A, we want to ask you some questions about productivity, which is something that Angela and I both think about a lot, and we consider you a role model in this respect. Your friends, I don't know if you know this, they like to joke that you get on a plane in New York and you've written a book before you land in San Francisco. I will tell you that the one time we worked on a paper together, I tell this story all the time, Angela's probably heard it 50 times. I would send you a draft along with all our other co-authors, and sometimes before it felt like I had sent my next email, I had track change comments back that were very detailed, and I used to wonder if you had a time machine. So could you tell us a little bit about how you're so productive? What are your secrets?
You can't edit a blank page. So sometimes I think to myself, I have a project and I don't have any words and there's nothing for me to edit. So why don't I put words and then I'll have something I can edit. And it'll sometimes start like with a paragraph that's terrible and I'll give up, or the next paragraph won't be terrible and I'll have something to edit. Or sometimes, I don't know if you ever feel this, that you wake up in the morning and you're kind of excited that you're there, and you're dishabituated because you were asleep and you didn't see how amazing life is. And you have a project and you're in a mood to take a risk. And you think maybe, is this completely idiosyncratic and a little crazy? But you might think, I'm in a mind to take a risk. So, and then something will be a first paragraph that's in your head, and then you can write that first paragraph, or even it can be a first sentence. And if you have excitement and a feeling of mischief about it, then there can be momentum to keep going. I mean, everyone's different. Or you'll write that sentence on that page and you'll say, no, that won't work. And then try something else. I have a great willingness to give up on a project that isn't working, which is freeing. And also, if I have an hour to write something and I have something to say, I will do that. So I don't know if it's like a sprinter who can get going pretty quick, maybe not that fast, but can get going pretty quick. And if I get an email from an amazing co-author who's asked me to track changes, what am I going to do? Go to lunch? I'm going to track changes.
I think Thaler says you think with your fingers.
That's also true. That's completely true.
And maybe that's good advice for those of us who struggle to write, is just sit down and think with your fingers.
I can say I've written a lot with Danny Kahneman, and we have very different styles. He's also a complete hero. And he likes to talk. And he said early on in our collaboration, he said, I think by talking, you think by writing.
Seems like a complementary relationship.
Yeah.
Especially if you end up writing the paper. So I want to know about your morning routine, because on the topic of productivity, I want to know what you eat for breakfast. And like if this were Tim Ferriss and we were asking you about so yeah, tell us your morning routine.
Okay.
And also when you wake up in the morning.
Okay, so if I'm in Washington most of the time and in Cambridge some of the time, if I'm in Washington, my Labrador retrievers will wake me up, typically at 5:30.
Wow.
The boy lab will bark, and the girl lab will, forgive the word, use her tongue. And that means I need to get up because they need excitement. And then I'll be up at 5:30 and maybe go back to sleep after I fed them, and then get up at 6:30 or 7. Then I'll have 1 cup of coffee, and maybe if there's a donut or something sweet, I'll have that. And then I would like to get writing. And I usually have energy for that at after the coffee at 7:30. So what's easy for me is if I have a draft. I right now have a book that exists, but it's bad, and I'm having fun because I'm hopeful I can make it at least not good is high aspiration, but I'm hopeful in the short run it will be okay. I'm liking that. To start something new, it's harder, and you of course, you need to have an idea and something to inspire.
Donut for breakfast was not on my bingo
No,
card,
we
so
had
I'm
to-
going to
we
store that
gasped.
away.
We just sort of like,
You give in to the biases yourself, it sounds like. Okay. We want to talk a little bit about new books. And you always have new books. We have a wonderful new book that we've gotten an early look at called Look Again. I'm a big fan, and it relates to the habituation topic you were just talking about. But could you tell us a little bit more about what inspired that work and why you're excited about that book?
Yeah, so my author is a neuroscientist, Tali Charette. We've worked on a bunch of, my co-author, she and I have worked on a bunch of papers together. And we thought that the topic, originally it was going to be about adapting to demons. And we thought as we went along that habituation was the right idea, not adaptation, and demons was too narrow. And for me, the energy of the book took off, improbably, with an interview with Julia Roberts in the New York Times. Thank you, Ms. Roberts. If any of you knows her, she, of the trillion things she deserves credit for, this is the lowest of the list, but she does deserve credit for it. She was interviewed and she was asked, when of course I wasn't reading this for research, she was asked, what's your idea of a good day? And she said, I wake up, I make breakfast for my kids, I take them to school, then I get ready to have lunch with my husband, then we have lunch, then it's ready to start getting ready for picking up my kids from lacrosse. And this is a little longer than I just described in the New York Times. Then she cuts herself off and she says, it's boring. But she says, what you need to know is because of my job, I have to go away for a couple of weeks every once in a while. And then when it comes back, it's surrounded by pixie dust. It resparkles. And that's completely great. That's about dishabituation. And I thought that gives energy for habituation and dishabituation to good things. And then there was something else that for me got the book's energy going. I don't know if you saw, there was a Red Cross thing about swimming and danger at swimming pools, the right way to go to a pool and the wrong way to go to a pool. And I'm a trustee of a school, and as a kind of exercise, the school showed us the Red Cross thing and said, did you notice anything about the kids and the swimming and who's doing the right thing and who's doing the wrong thing? And we all looked and said, no. And then I didn't notice anything weird. And then one of the trustees, person of color, looked and said, the white kids are all doing the right thing and the black kids are all doing the wrong thing. What's up with that? And it turned out that that was part of what the exercise was about. And what I learned while doing the book was that the Red Cross had done this. There was no intention to do anything. They were completely habituated to seeing the white, shocking, right? Seeing the white kids doing the bad thing and the kids of color, the good thing, and the kids of color doing the not good thing. And the Red Cross didn't mean anything by it. This isn't in like 1880. This is like a few years ago. And then someone who saw it, who was a person of color, said, Red Cross, what are you doing? And it became a thing and they took it down. And that is a clue, I think, to habituation to good and bad. So there's a book called Sexual Harassment of Working Women by Catherine McKinnon, published in the 1970s, which is basically tales of sexual harassment and also popularized or coined the term sexual harassment. And that is a dishabituation manual, that book at its time, when something that was, I'll tell you a little story that McKinnon in the 1990s or something came to the University of Chicago and talked about pornography. And I had a friend who 2 weeks later, I hadn't thought about this in connection with the book, but as part of the moral foundation of the book, said he used to look at Playboy and now he can't. He said he just can't look at it. It makes him sick. And it was because he was dishabituated. And so that tale isn't in the book, but the idea of habituating to injustice, even on the part of people who are subject to injustice, that is in the book.
At the close of this event, I want to thank you for coming. And everyone else, please stay in the loop, subscribe to the BCFG newsletter, follow us on social media, and we will see you next time. Thank you.